Last time, I made a rolling tray for my dice. This time it's a storage box. First things, as normal, is to measure stuff. So I wanted it to be for a, normal set of Dungeons & Dragons dice, despite the fact that I don't actually play. The biggest single die is a D20, which ended up being about 24mm across, and there are 7 dice in a set. Rather than make the box perfectly fit all of the dice, which would mean individually measuring them, I figured I'd make it more general and make it 7 times the largest size. So 7 times that is 168mm. So then it was a matter of just stretching that out a little bit to give it a bit more space. So we got to about 17cm from there. That was how long the groove had to be for all the dice to fit in. From there, I knew I wanted it to close magnetically, so I needed space to put the magnets in. I wanted those to be about half a centimetre out from the edges of the groove, so put those at 18cm. Later on I realised that didn't make any sense because the magnets themselves were almost a centimetre wide, so I actually should have made the gap bigger. It didn't end up mattering, but I should have made the gap bigger in my measurements. And then added a bit more space on just for, space sake, honestly. So it ended up being about 19cm, and then it was just marking it out on the wood. There's only 2 pieces to this, there's a top and a bottom, so it wasn't actually a whole lot of cutting this time, and because of that, I thought this was going to be really simple. And it ended up not being simple at all. It was actually a bit of a nightmare. One thing I wanted to do was to put a bevel on all the edges, because I thought that would look nice. I ended up not doing that because I messed up measuring in the first place, but I messed up even more later on. So I got rid of that idea very quickly. Following cutting the pieces down to size, then I had to remeasure some bits so I knew where the centres were, so I knew exactly where I wanted my grooves to be, and then the space for where the magnets were going to go. It was at this point when I decided not to do those bevels I was talking about, because I just had not left myself enough space at all. Later on you'll also see that despite having 7 dice, and that working out to be about 168mm across, I ended up making the groove way longer than it needed to be. If I'd have done this actually properly, then I easily could have done enough space for the dice, enough space for the magnets, and enough space for the bevels with just the pieces that I had. But going off the measurements I'd written down did not leave me enough space for that. So I was going off those measurements, but in reality, I probably could have done it. I bought a couple of new tools for this, one of which was a center punch, and what it does is just leaves a hole essentially in the piece of wood so that you can perfectly find it for drilling into later. There's this adage of measure twice and cut in once, and it turns out I don't have the patience to measure twice. I barely have the patience to measure once, and I was just messing up at this point so badly. It took me a really long time to work out how to draw a straight line with my square. I don't know why, I couldn't work it out in my head. I got a new thing to mark with. It's called a marking knife, and it just gives you kind of a more accurate line than a pencil does. It makes for one actual lines in the wood, and it also means you can find them with the knife really easily, so it makes it really replicable, which is really good. I ended up not using it very much. I probably should have used it more because I think some stuff would have gone a lot better if I had. This video doesn't have a large variety of shots, mostly because last time when I was making it, I was moving the camera around between shots and I was rearranging everything I was doing, and it looked really nice. The issue is that it made cleanup even harder. Cleaning up took me multiple days last time, just to get all of the dust, and I still didn't get all of it, but I got the vast majority. This time I was no, I'll do what I can for new shots, but I'm trying to balance making a nice video with also making a thing I actually want to make, and then I've got to clean up after myself later. So I kept my table saw and all of my tools in one position, and then moved the camera around in different places, but not that frequently. Also, my wife was sick at the time, and last time she helped me organise the shots, get me in frame and everything, and because I didn't have her, because, she was ill, it meant I had to set up a shot that I knew was okay, and essentially just leave the camera there for as much as I could do that time. Woodworking has become this, incredibly stressful and, meditative, and it's a very strange experience for me. I quite like doing it, but I also feel I'm really bad at it. I realise I've only just sort of started, but I feel I do a really bad job every time I'm doing it, and especially because doing this required me to learn how to use a lot of tools and things that I hadn't used before. The main thing that I used this time was my router. There's a video I made a few months ago making a CNC router, and this is essentially a handheld version of that. It's a lot more powerful, but it's somewhat more awkward to use. So essentially you get a load of different bits you can change all the bits out, and they all do like different sorts of cuts. Now, the bit that I used for one piece is called a groove bit, and it cuts a groove. And I was making a groove, so I'm like, yep, that's what I want. It turns out that was not what I wanted at all, and it looks awful. It looks so bad that I actually spent an entire day just working out how I would do it on my CNC machine. I mean, it didn't actually take a day to do that, but I was just like frustrated, so I spent a day and like learned how to do all that stuff. And then it turns out that doing that for the 2 pieces would have taken like 5 hours, and I was just angry, so I didn't want to wait that long, so I was like, no, I'll just do it. I first tried to cut some pieces just on the table with the groove bit, and it didn't work very well, and it looks awful. And a bit of the later sections of the videos are all just me trying to fix that. With the second piece, I changed bits to just straight bit, and it turns out that I should have been using that all along because it was way better, and it was way easier as well. So I ended up using my crosscut sled that I built last time. I like flipped it upside down, used it like a table, which is what you can see, and I've clamped that to the table so it's higher up, because that just makes it a bit easier for me to like do it. And then the router itself has like an edge guide, where it's like just a bit of metal that sticks out one end, but you put that up to a flat edge, and you can slide it along and it keeps a perfectly straight line. I used that, and then I used some offcuts of wood to build like a sort of, like a slide, essentially, because the router is actually very big, it's quite wide. So it wouldn't just slide on the piece that I was cutting, I needed like supports on the sides of it. And then the way that I held the piece down, I really should have included this, but I didn't. I used 2 pieces of tape. You can use double-sided tape, but I learned a different way of doing it, and it works really well. So that's what I've been using, where you get like a piece of tape, like a painter's tape or something, and put it on a flat surface. And then you put another piece of painter's tape on your wood, whatever you're working with. And then you put a layer of super glue in between the two and stick it down, and it just holds like perfectly. And then when you want to get it off at the end, you just peel the painter's tape and it just comes off, and that's it. It's really good. It works really well, and it's really easy. I was surprised how well it worked. But I was doing that, and it held really well, and once I got into using the router and using the edge guard and using the correct bits, it went really well. One of the only issues is it was a complete mess. Like, it threw up so much dust. It was actually, I think it was probably worse than cutting the pieces on my table saw was last time, just for the sheer amount it spat out everywhere. It was all over the place. The only thing that was better is that I had a load of dust sheets this time, which were draped all around the room, which caught a lot of the dust, and it made cleanup a lot easier later on. So after I finished using the router, the next thing to do was to drill the holes for where the magnets were going to go. And it was pretty simple, drilling the correct size hole in the correct places. The issues I had were that it created a ton of tear out, which is where it sort of like rips the fibers of the wood and rips out. There are ways of mitigating that I just didn't think to do. Like, a really simple way that I know is you can just put tape over the edges and it just mitigates the tear out. But like I say, I didn't do any of that. And so with how hideous one of the pieces looked after using the router, and with the tear out from drilling the holes for the magnet, I was really down on the entire project by that time. So then I spent a lot of time just trying to work out how to fix it. So there was a thing I knew I could do, and I wasn't sure how well it'd work, but I figured I'd try it. Cutting all the stuff makes a lot of dust. So what you do is you collect all the dust, mix it with glue, and then it makes like a paste, almost like a clay kind of in texture, and you use that to fill in the gaps. Now, usually you would only do this for really small gaps, but for one thing, most of the gaps were pretty small, and for another, I just wanted to know how to use it, and it actually worked pretty well. It feels pretty solid, and when I was doing it, it looked great. For some reason, it dried black, and I have absolutely no idea why. The glue is supposed to dry clear, and the wood dust is literally just the dust from cutting this wood. It's not anything else. You can see me using it, and it looks fine. It's by no means a perfect solution, but I'm using all of these as like a method of learning how to do stuff. You should test how to do things on like scrap pieces, but as you can tell, that isn't what I've done. I've tested and learned how to do things on the actual pieces I want to do, and it's kind of because I've got into this feeling towards all the things I make, where the mistakes and stuff like kind of tell part of the story from making it, so I actually kind of like leaving them there. So to some extent, I like leaving the mistakes in the piece, because it like shows me learning how to do stuff. Like, you can quite clearly see the difference between the piece I did badly and the piece I did, if not well, at least better. Like this one project. And now, next time, I know how to do even better. So I kind of like doing that. And then using the glue and stuff was something I wanted to try, and I think it worked pretty well. I'm not really happy with how it turned out, but I'm also not sure why it turned out the way it did. I don't know why it turned so dark. Like, honestly, I just don't understand. So once all that had dried and everything, the next step was to sand again. I also did a much better job sanding the end grain this time. It looks a lot nicer on this piece than it does on the other piece. That being said, on the other piece it didn't matter as much. All of the end grain pieces were glued together anyway, so it didn't matter so much if they looked alright. In this piece, it did matter so much because they were on the outside and you're actually going to see them, so I wanted them to look nicer overall. The magnets are really good. The magnets are not perfect, but that's because of me, I didn't put them in perfectly. But the magnets are actually really strong. I'm surprised by how strong they were for how little I spent on them. They're really strong, so I don't think it's going to like fall apart. But they're not so strong that you can't like pull it apart relatively easily. Like, I was pretty happy with them. And then once I'd finished sanding, you can see me finally putting everything in place. And everything works, but you can also tell that it's way too big. And I don't know why. I don't know why I made it as big as I did. I thought I'd made it right, and it turns out I just hadn't. I'd made it massive. Last time, I didn't include much footage of me using the stain, and that was because I set up the camera wrong, honestly. So this time I was like, well, I'll do it from an overhead shot where I can see what I'm doing the entire time, and then I've definitely got footage of it. Basically, all you do is you get the stain, you pour it on a piece of cloth, and then you rub it all over the wood. I also mentioned last time that I ran into some issues with the stain where it didn't take over the glue, or rather, I wasn't totally sure, but I thought that was what it was. I know for a fact that's what it is now because it's done it again on this piece. You're supposed to be able to stain it fine. And like, I know that it wasn't going to be the same colour because it's a different material. They're not going to take the stain exactly the same, are they? But everywhere the glue touched is a different colour. And I don't know what to do about that, to be honest. Do I just need to sand even more aggressively to get rid of all of the glue? Because I get rid of enough glue that I can't see it, but it must like absorb into the wood in the process, like even just quickly. And it completely ruins how it looks. There's like much lighter patches, especially on the end grain, which just did not take the stain properly at all, and I need to work out how to fix that, because I don't like it. I do quite like how this stain looks. Part of me is not totally sure I even need it, but it is nice. It just makes it just a little bit, I don't know, poppier, kind of. It's nice anyway, I like it. The only issue is that the place I got this from is now closed down, so I can never get it again. So some of my lighting is a bit bad, mostly because I used a lot of natural light in doing this, and it was raining outside, and it was not exactly late in the day, but late in the day for here in the winter, so it gets dark pretty early. I recorded this at like 3 o'clock and the sun goes down at 5, so it was already getting dark. So I had my lights on, but they aren't great. One thing I wanted to do this time that I didn't do last time is learn how to use like lacquer. So what that does is provide like actual protection to the wood. The stain doesn't provide any protection, it just makes it look nicer, whereas the lacquer provides protection and looks nice. I say it like that because I actually don't like how it looks that much, but at the moment I'm not really sure what else I'll use. It was a complete mess. I used my crosscut sled again, and one of my tarps, I clamped the tarp around it, and then I used it kind of like a spray booth, so the lacquer didn't go everywhere, and I just kept running into issues with it. So much was coming out. Didn't take a whole lot of effort to spray the piece, which was nice. The issues though, is that it kept sticking to everything. It stuck to my glove constantly, it stuck to the cones, it stuck to the actual tarp itself. After doing it, I just don't actually like how it looks all that much. It looks okay, it's not the worst, but it's not the best either. I wanted one way of clearly distinguishing the bottom piece from the top piece. So what I thought I would do is put some felt on the bottom piece. I thought that would look nice, and it doesn't. It's fine. It's not the best. I think it would look better without, to be honest, but I'm not going to take it off. And it also isn't even straight. If you watched my Haunter video, which I know you didn't, you'll see that I'm using the same knife. And I absolutely hate this knife. I think this knife is terrible. And I think this knife is the problem, to be honest, because it can't give me a straight line. It feels whenever I put pressure on the blade itself flexes. And I need to put pressure on the blade to cut, but when I put any pressure on the blade, it flexes and won't give me a straight line to cut anymore. It's just awful. I wasn't totally sure how to attach the felt to the wood. I had some PVA glue, which I had used in the last build when I put the felt on the inside of my piece, and then I had some super glue, so I used the super glue, and I think it was actually the wrong decision because it kind of like melted the felt, so you can like actually see a line where the glue is, which I didn't want. Oh, and one other thing is that in the process of cutting this felt, I also managed to cut a piece of the box, so I just hate this knife. But then it was just a matter of a little bit of tidying up, getting off some of the worst bits of the felt, and then we were actually done. Now, it looks like this didn't take very long, but this is like almost 2 weeks of work. Going into this, I was like, there's only 4 cuts to make. It'll be fine. I'm cutting 2 pieces of wood, I'm cutting a groove in them, and then I'm drilling some holes. I'll be fine with this, it'll be easy, it'll only be a day or 2, and this took me nearly 2 weeks. I learned how to use a lot of the stuff, so I'm happy about that, but I think I'm much happier with my dice tray than I am with my dice box. I think if the dice box was sized better, I'd like it more if it was flatter, because there's like a bit of a gap because the magnets aren't perfectly flat. I would like that more. The magnets aren't also perfectly centered because I just found that really difficult to do. I would like it more, like there's loads of little things, and they're all things I did, but at the same time, they're all things that I have learned to do better now and will do better on in the future. So I don't regret making it at all, and I'm happy I've got it. And it's one of those things where it's like, if it was perfect now, there would never be any reason to do anything again, would there? Special thanks to my patrons, Justin Wood, Hobbs, and Koopy Vegeta. You can join my patrons at patreon.com/Holden Gatsby, check out my TikTok and Twitter at Holden Gatsby, and follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Holden Gatsby. Don't forget to subscribe to all of my channels. If you want more, you can watch my last video now, but if not, then thanks for sticking around. Bye.